Welcome aboard the Pilot Money Guys podcast, where our mission is to help professional pilots build and protect wealth on their journey to financial freedom. This podcast is brought to you by Leading Edge Financial Planning.
Hello and welcome to the Pilot Money Guys, Flight 114 already. I'm your host, Charlie Mattingly, former airline pilot and certified financial planner with Leading Edge Financial Planning. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. Our mission here with the Pilot Money Guys is just to bring a shared perspective, bring some knowledge and clarity to the world of money, investing, retirement planning to our professional pilots out there. So we appreciate you listening today. We appreciate you sharing the podcast. If you know anyone that could also benefit from this content. So we appreciate that. Also, check out wherever you're listening to your podcast, check out the Pilot Wealth Index. We designed that index to give you an idea of, are you on track for retirement? Just a few questions, take you a couple minutes to get through, but hopefully it's beneficial and useful in determining, hey, am I thinking about the right things? Are you on track for retirement? It's not meant to be a complete financial plan, of course, but just to make sure you're thinking about things that matter as you prepare for eventual retirement from your airline, fractional carrier, corporate job, whatever it might be. Today, Kevin and I are excited to interview Dr. Michael Finke. In fact, Dr. Michael Finke is someone we've known for a long time. And in our nerd world of financial planning, investing, retirement planning, he's like a rock star. In fact, when we go to conferences to learn more about the industry, what's going on, he is definitely a speaker that we look for and we kind of follow around like groupies. We're Dr. Finke groupies. So anyway, we are excited to have him today. He was generous enough with his time to come aboard with us today and just share some of his research, what it looks like to have a wonderful and enjoyable, fulfilling retirement. That's his research. That's how I kind of summarize it anyway. But let me get to the actual bio for Dr. Michael Finke, because he's a PhD, certified financial planner, professor of wealth management, and Frank M. Engel Distinguished Chair in Economic Security at the American College of Financial Services. He received a doctorate in consumer economics from the Ohio State University in 1998. And in finance from the University of Missouri in 2011. He leads the O. Alfred Granum Center for Financial Security at the American College and is a research fellow at the Retirement Income Institute and a member of the Defined Contribution Institutional Investment Association Academic Advisory Council. That's a lot. But the point is that he knows his stuff. But basically, he studied what retirees, once they get into retirement, what really makes for a great retirement. Interviewed, even was part of a Facebook group of retirees, just kind of learning about what people wish they would have done. So his research is invaluable. And I believe if you listen to this today, if you take to heart what he's talking about and think about it, put some action towards it, then you can have a better retirement. I think that's all there is to it, because there's a lot of things that we don't think about as we head into retirement that kind of surprise us a little bit. So those are some things we talk about today as well. So we appreciate Dr. Michael Finke being a part of our podcast today, being a part of the Pilot Money Guys. Stay till the end where we give him an honorary call sign. And I hope you enjoy the interview today with me, the Professor Kevin Gormley, and Dr. Michael Finke. Enjoy. All right, Dr. Finke, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time and efforts and energy to put forth on our podcast today for our professional pilots on the Pilot Money Guys. We got to hear you in Vegas for the first time. We've read a lot of your material, of course, though, and we introduced you, but of course, you're professor at the American College of Financial Planning. You've done all kinds of other things that we talked about as well. Your research is incredibly useful to us and our clients. So we're really privileged to have you on today. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, Charlie. Yeah. It's such a fascinating group of clients that you have. It's going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. We love our pilots. We've got commercial airline pilots, cargo pilots, fractional, corporate. But I believe the majority listening are probably from the commercial airline world. And even Michael, some of the spouses that don't fly listen in to go, what's it like in my husband or my wife's career? What are they experiencing, out there? Because it's one of those things, you leave for a few days, you do your job and you come back home, and that's kind of what it looks like to the spouses sometimes. But without further ado, I mean, you've done a lot of research. The first kind of thing we'll talk about today, and the one thing that fascinated me and Kevin when we heard you talk, was just all the work you've done on what it looks like into retirement. It's almost as if, I don't want to put you too high on a pedestal, but it's almost like this crystal ball of like, hey, this is what people are telling us in retirement that really makes a satisfying retirement. And we want to just go down that path because we think it can be really useful for our pilot clients.
Well, let me give you a little bit of background. Back when I was at Texas Tech University, I'm at the American College, right? I was the head of a retirement planning and living center. And so I had access to do surveys, and I had graduate students who were doing research on different aspects of retirement. And I'll admit to you that for a long time, when I thought about retirement planning, I thought it was just a numbers game. I thought it was a math problem. So you had to save enough money, and then you had to pull out a certain amount after you retired, and then you were going to be happy. But I had one graduate student who said, you know what, we have this data set that was created by the University of Michigan, which, it's very difficult for me as an Ohio State grad to admit that anything useful came out of the University of Michigan. But they started in 1994 interviewing 20,000 near retirees and retirees. So they're all over the age of 50. And it's a longitudinal data set, which means that they follow the same retirees over time. And my graduate student found some amazing variables in there on life satisfaction. He created this life satisfaction index, which was maybe 8 or 9 different questions on basically how happy are you in retirement? How satisfied and happy are you? And he looked at what the predictors were of life satisfaction. And when we ran the numbers, they were so consistent that there are these 3 areas that predict life satisfaction in retirement. And fortunately, one of them is money. The more money you have, generally, the more satisfied you had. But we did find that there was kind of a max of around $4.5 million. Like at that point, you have enough. And then the other 2 areas, I like to call them the pillars of retirement satisfaction, are relationships and health. And what I've done in my research since then is I've looked into both of those areas as investments, because they are investments. So what is an investment? An investment is a sacrifice that you make today in order to live better in the future. So when you save money in your 401k, that's money you could have spent today. So you could have had a little bit more fun today, but instead you say, no, I'm gonna push it into the future. I'm gonna spend that money after I retire. That's an investment. That's the definition of an investment. Sacrifice so that I can live better. But so is health. And, a lot of us know that if we don't invest in our health, that we start feeling worse, that our ability to get enjoyment from life is not the same if we're in poor health as if we're in good health. And also relationships. And I think this is one of those aspects where a lot of us who are numbers people forget that the money really doesn't bring us happiness. The money buys experiences and stuff, and it is the experiences and the stuff that the money buys that actually brings us happiness. And if we're just doing it by ourselves, then that's not very fulfilling. So the money in and of itself is not bringing us happiness. It's an input into activities that are the actual thing that brings us happiness in retirement. I think if we think that way, that it is this combination of investments that we put together to actually create a satisfying retirement, we can go into it much better prepared for living a satisfying retirement.
I love that because, Michael, in the world of the airlines, there's this continuous carrot of if I fly more, I make more. And, it's designed that way, which is kind of a double-edged sword. It's really nice to be able to go do that if there's a college bill you need to pay. But at the same time, it makes it very difficult, I think, for some of our professional pilots to, like you said, to invest in those relationships. You've got to give up something, or invest in your health. You've got to give up something. And regularly we hear people say, I don't want to leave money on the table by not flying that trip or doing that extra work thing. And that's a real slippery slope. So I love this point you're making because it takes a little bit of sacrifice or investment.
Yeah. And those friendships that we make, and let me make some points about what are our most important relationships. So the number one most important relationship, and maybe it isn't surprising, is that of your primary partner. The marital relationship is incredibly important. And, I think for people who fly all the time, they may forget that this is a ongoing investment, and they are going to draw from this investment after retirement. The research in this area really shows that it is, and I know there are men and women pilots, but it does seem to be a problem among men that they fail to invest in relationships outside of their workplace that they can then draw from in retirement. And what very often happens after retirement is that perhaps the wife in an opposite sex couple is going to be more has developed these relationships, and they wants to maintain these relationships in retirement, and the husband hasn't done it. Like they have failed to invest. Think of it as like not putting any money in your 401k. They failed to invest in their friendships, and so that creates its own marital discord, because the one spouse may want to maintain their friendships that they've had for many years, and the other spouse hasn't made that same investment and relies too much on the spouse as a source of satisfaction, and that can create a certain amount of friction. And the other thing the data clearly shows is that your kids are not a major source of life satisfaction after you retire. So a lot of people think, well, I'm going to move close to my kids after I retire, it's going to be great. But they don't really think through, how often am I going to see them? And how often do they want me to see them? Am I going to be seeing them every weekend or maybe once a month? And, how does my spouse feel about spending time with their in-laws constantly? This is one of those areas where there is clear evidence that people overestimate the amount of satisfaction they're going to get from being close to their kids. And they underestimate the importance of making investments in your primary relationship and in your relationship with your friends. And I think it's a big risk, especially for people where they have to give up money in order to maintain those friendships and say, you know what, I'm not going to take that opportunity. I'm going to spend it at home, or I'm going to go visit a friend. That's a sacrifice. That's what you mean, but that's an investment. Investments are all about sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you talked about, on another speech, you talked about, why not buy cars? What about buying cars? What about buying RVs? Our audience likes to buy airplanes, quite frankly. So what did you find on those, as far as the spending is concerned?
Well, I never thought about buying an airplane, but I'll use the RVs as an example. So I have a friend who's a financial advisor, and very often he hears this from new retirees. I'm going to take a few $100,000. I'm going to buy myself an RV after I retire. I'm going to see the country. And he says, whenever a client tells him that, I say, that's a great idea. It's going to be wonderful for you guys to get out and get on the road. But here's my suggestion. Just rent one for the first month and rent a mid-size one. And that'll help you figure out if you want to buy a smaller, more mobile motorhome, place that you can park in lots of different places. Or do you want to get like a big one that you can live in? It's like living in a house. And they're like, okay, I'll rent one for a month. And he tells them that because he knows that 2/3 of his clients are never going to want to get into a motorhome again after the first month. He's just saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars on a quickly depreciating asset. And the reason is because some of them will get on the road and they'll go see Mount Rushmore or whatever they always said they wanted to see, and they'll stay in the RV park, and they'll hook up and they'll watch TV at night, and then they'll get up in the next morning and they'll go see the next place. And essentially they're like underpaid truck drivers. They're just going from one place to another, seeing things that they've never seen before, checking things off the box, but they're not actually getting a whole lot of enjoyment from the experience. The ones who stick with it are the ones who go to the RV park and they set up a little sign in front of the RVs and say, welcome to the Smiths, and they sit on their beach chairs and they talk to people, and it becomes a social opportunity. And that's what you really need to remember about making these investments in things like RVs or even airplanes. If it's a social opportunity, then it's probably worth the investment. The example I very often give is classic cars. For a lot of guys, classic cars are an entree into online communities where they can establish new friendships. They can go to cars and coffees and talk to people. It's a way to deepen their social relationships in retirement. But if they don't see it that way, if they think they're actually going to get happiness from driving around in the car, they're probably overestimating the amount of happiness they're going to get. What you're buying into is a community.
Yeah.
And I think with flying, I think it's a great idea to own your own plane, but maybe rent one for a while and see how, and I think if you're going to do it right, take your friends or your spouse with you, use it as an opportunity to establish new friendships, buy an airplane that makes you part of a community online where you can have other people you can talk to about the experience, go have lunch in interesting airports. That's the kind of experience that I think you can probably get more satisfaction out of. But if you're just going to toot around in it and spend a lot of money on gas and maintenance, then maybe it's not a great investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Devin, what do you got?
I just think we have a lot of pilots that want to buy a plane, maybe to save on taxes, and that's almost impossible. So I much more like your idea of getting a plane so you're able to go visit people, socialize, etc. The other thing I'll say, Michael, is that when I do go over my friend's house this weekend to share in some bourbon and watch some football games, I will be telling my wife that I'm making an investment. I hope that's okay. Yeah. But yeah, so you talked a little bit about health, and obviously there's some things that we can do to actually work on our health. But sometimes we're just unlucky. I mean, so what are your thoughts around what people might do to try to increase their health span, not just their lifespan?
That's a great point. So I don't know if either of you have read Peter Attia's Outlive. It's an interesting book. I think it's worth reading. It's kind of a good instruction manual on how to invest efficiently in your health. It's kind of like, investing book, but an investing book for your health. And one of the points that he makes is, you can do everything right. You can develop a regular exercise regimen. You can watch what you eat, and you can get cancer and die. Just the same way that you can invest prudently, you can take the proper amount of investment risk. And then, a 2008 happens and you get knocked off your plan. It can always be the right decision, but you can end up with an outcome that you don't like. That happens. But when we invest, we make prudent decisions based on how it's most likely to turn out. And when it comes to our health, by establishing a regular exercise regime, we can improve. And one of the things that I really like from that book is this measure of VO2 max, which is our body's ability to process oxygen. And one of the points is that VO2 max goes down as we get older. Our ability to efficiently process oxygen goes down, but we can reduce that downward sloping path by making that investment in our health. And we can even get a tracker to see how our VO2 max is changing over time. I have a friend of mine that I've actually done some research with named David Stewart, who has a website called SuperAge. And, David follows his VO2 max. He's in his mid 60s and he's got a VO2 max over 50. And he can do anything that any 40-year-old can do because he's made that investment, but he's aware of it. He's tracking his progress over time. And he's, I want to go hiking when I retire. I love hiking. I live in Santa Fe. I can go hiking whenever I want. And one of my plans is after I retire, I'm going to travel around the world, maybe go to Switzerland and go hiking in the mountains. I can't do that. I may have the money to fly there and rent out a hotel room, but I can't do it physically unless I have a VO2 max that's probably at least around 35. And if I don't have that, then what's the use of the money? I'm not going to be able to engage in that activity. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's very important to be conscious of how are we tracking not only in terms of our 401k balance, but also in terms of our VO2 max, because that's going to be another one of those inputs into the production of happiness.
Yeah, and I'll just second the book Outlive. I did listen to it. I didn't read it, but I listened to it a few months ago, and I've been working out more since then. And he just talks about really the benefit of exercise again, and it's really I think he's really very scientifically minded in how he's a medical doctor and some of the things he says. So thank you for that. Back to you, Charlie.
Yeah, Michael. One of the our goal, obviously, for especially this podcast, but and even our planning, when someone gets in their mid 50s, late 50s, we really want to start honing in on these things to help them have a great retirement. What we don't want to see is somebody 65, they're done flying, and then they're a little bit lost. That's what we want to avoid. So we've talked about the importance of making that investment in your physical health and then in the relationships. The relationships are really hard because when you're out on the road, you want to go home and you want to literally isolate yourself. So we know we got to fight against that tendency. We have some folks, Michael, that their retirement goal is to buy 200 acres somewhere in Wyoming and live right in the middle of it. That's what you tend to want to do. So we know that, when I got out of the airlines, relationships became really rewarding about a year after I was out, because it took a while to get normalized. But the other thing that I think a challenge is when you're so involved in your career of flying, you're a captain at a major airline, you're making really important decisions every day, and then all of a sudden, nothing. That's a difficult transition. Identity, importance, those things. What have you seen on those topics?
Well, I think first of all, you make a great point about you live such a fast-paced life. And my guess is that before you hit that age 65 threshold, you're doing everything you can to maximize the amount of flying you're doing. I'm just guessing, because you want to make sure that you're financially prepared for that moment when you're not able to earn that significant amount of money. And so what you start fantasizing about is what you want to do when you get a break. And what you want to do when you get a break is just relax. And a lot of people who have high stress jobs will, for example, they love playing golf because it's their opportunity to get outdoors and to do something physical. And so they think, I cannot wait for a time in my life where all I do is play golf. And so they reach retirement and they play golf, and then they play golf again the next day, and they play it again the day after that. And all of a sudden they realize, it's not as much fun as I thought it was going to be, because it was a lot more fun when it was a break from a lot of mental stimulation. And when it no longer serves as that break, when it essentially becomes your job, then all of a sudden it's not as much fun. People think they want to move onto the beach when they retire, and that's great, but imagine sitting on a beach chair looking at the ocean. It's so wonderful when you first get to a beach on vacation. But can you imagine doing it for 2 weeks in a row or 3 weeks in a row? All of a sudden, that thing that you were fantasizing about has lost its luster. And in fact, that's exactly what the research says. It says that we're very bad at projecting what is going to make us satisfied in retirement because we're using our current life as a reference. Mm-hmm. And what makes us really happy in our current life is getting away from this mental stress that we have in the workplace. But when we're retired, we have to recognize that we're not going to enjoy that quite as much. And one of the biggest mistakes we can make is to isolate ourselves. I did a retirement panel a couple of years ago with a financial advisor who had this really interesting idea of taking his clients who were living a very successful retirement and putting them on stage and having me interview them and talk to them about their lives to the rest of his financial planning clients so that they could kind of see who is doing it right and what does their life look like. And one of them had sold their law firm at the age of 55, got a decent chunk of money. She always loved going to Mexico and hanging out on the beaches in Mexico. And so she bought a house on the beach in Mexico, and she lasted 1 month. And to her credit, she decided, being away from all my friends in my life and, all these things that were providing me with real satisfaction before, and just sitting on a beach for a month is not going to do it for me. So she sold her house and then moved back to Denver where she was living and, reestablished those bonds, those friendships, and got herself into activities that were actually challenging for her. And if you look at the research on what makes people happy, it's doing things that you're good at and doing things that are just enough of a challenge to keep you interested. Mm-hmm. Not hugely stressful, but something that you're good at, something that presents a little bit of a challenge. Now, some people think that volunteering is going to do that for them, but maybe you're volunteering at an activity that's not necessarily something that's challenging or something that you're particularly good at. So can you find an activity that is something where you have a certain amount of knowledge and provides a certain amount of challenge? I mean, you could be an instructor. You could, there are many different options for people that could provide that type of satisfaction, but don't expect that doing nothing is going to make you happy. And I think oftentimes what people fall into is, when you look at the time use studies, the number one activity in retirement other than sleeping is watching television. If you find yourself 2 years into retirement and you're sitting in front of the television and you're not happy because it's feeding you, negative messages, and you're not establishing a broader set of friendships and acquaintanceships, you're doing something wrong. Take it as a sign that maybe you need to change your habits, because, our lives are really a function of our habits. And if you get into a rut, if the habits are to sit in front of the television and to essentially waste your retirement away, then why did you save the money in the first place? Do you save the money so that you would do something enjoyable? But oftentimes we can fall into this trap of not realizing what that is.
Yeah, it's funny, Charlie, because when Michael said that, we all go, well, yeah, of course, that's not a good way to live. But so many people do fall into that. I mean, I guess that's not their plan going in, but I guess that becomes what they end up doing, because they probably don't have a plan. I mean, I don't think anyone says, look, I'm going to watch TV for 6 hours a day and scream at the TV. So I wanted to ask you a little bit. We did see your presentation on being a Facebook lurker and lurking in Facebook, about what actual financial products or types of accounts and stuff like that make people happy. So if I'm a 55-year-old person and I'm looking at, a pilot retiring at 65, what are the financial things I can kind of do to tweak my own financial plan to make myself maybe more happy in retirement?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was so interesting. I was having a conversation with someone from Australia, because the Australian government has this amazing system where everybody saves. Their mandatory savings rate is like 10 to 12% of their income. So everybody ends up in retirement with a huge amount of money. And they've now been able to look at the data to see what people do with the money. And, some people just blow it all immediately, but most people just don't spend it. They sit on their pot of cash forever. And there's a number of factors that feed into this tendency to not spend your money. Even though you saved it for the purpose of living better, a lot of people just want to put their arms around their money and never see it get smaller. I've done interviews with retirees a few years ago. I remember one couple, they were about 80 and they'd been retired for about 15 years. They were so proud of the fact that they had been so frugal and they had significantly more money at 80 than they did at 65. And so I asked them, you must really want to give that money to your kids. And they were silent for a moment and they looked at each other and they said, well, no, that's not why we're not spending the money. And so I said, well, is there a third option I don't know about? Because I think many people just don't acknowledge the reality that there's only two places your money can go. You can either spend it or you can pass it on after you're dead. And there's a good question to ask about whether or not you get more enjoyment from passing the money on after you're dead, or whether you would get more enjoyment from passing on some of that money while you're still alive. It's, my grandmother used to call it giving money with a warm hand instead of a cold one. Can you actually give yourself permission and some of the money that you save? Because frankly, as human beings, we are really not good at admitting the fact that we're mortal. And if you think about the life of a healthy person in the United States, let's say a healthy woman, it's about 90 years. So on average. So that means that she gets maybe 9 rows of 10 dots. Each of those dots represents a year of her life on average. And, once she's hit 65, she's got 2 rows of 10 dots and 1 row of 5 dots left on average. And what that means is that, she's got a certain amount of money and she's got 2 rows of 10 dots and 1 row of 5 dots. How does she want to place her chips on each of those dots? And how much does she want to pass on after she's gone? And by the way, that first row of 5 dots is going to be your healthiest and most active part of your retirement. So don't waste that part of your retirement. Figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to use that money. Because if you don't do it by the time you're in your 80s, then, we've actually looked at fund spending of people who are in their mid 80s. They don't spend a whole lot of money on travel and going out to dinner with friends and going to shows and doing all the kind of fun things that you can actually enjoy maybe more in your late 60s and early 70s. Think about what you're going to accomplish during that period of your life where you're most active in retirement. And don't just sit on the money because you're too afraid to spend it. And so, my research with David Blanchett, he was at Morningstar and he's now at a company called PGIM. We look at people who have pensions. So in the old days, and among some of your clients, they will have access to some pension. And then we look at people who have an equivalent amount of savings. Just for example, you can take $500,000 of savings and you can buy yourself about, let's say, $3,000 a month of income. And who's happier? Who spends more? The one who has $500,000 in retirement or the one who has $3,000 a month of income? And what we find is the one who has $3,000 a month of income spends about twice as much as the one who has $500,000 of savings, because they're framing that money as money that they have a license to spend. If you think about in the era where pensions were more generous, people who got a pension had they had no problem with spending every single dollar of that pension paycheck. So my mother gets a pension from the state of Ohio, and she will spend every single dollar of the pension. But if she has to spend any money out of savings, she feels really nervous about it. If she feels like she's almost not allowed to do that. That's money for maybe another time. But the pension money, she can spend every dollar of it. And so that really creates this interesting conundrum about, all right, what should you do with your money when you retire? Should you think about converting part of your savings into a stream of income that looks like a pension? Because you're probably going to feel more comfortable spending that money. And it's probably good to know that no matter how long you live, it's not going to run out.
I know Kevin's going to have some questions on the annuities and annuitization and whatnot. But Michael, I loved your story you told about your own experience with converting. I think it was when you were a professor or teaching your 403B, you did that exact thing. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. So when I went from University of Missouri to Texas Tech University back in 2006, it was actually a fellow professor who told me, you know what, you can take those 7 years that you were at University of Missouri, and the University of Texas system will allow you to count those towards your pension. So in other words, if I bought those 7 years of credit, I could get a bigger pension when I went to Texas Tech University. And so I did a little bit of research, I applied to be able to do it. And they said, well, Mike, it's going to take $160,000 to buy those 7 years of credit. And that's about all the money I had saved in my 403B over the course of those 7 years. But by the way, I don't know if you remember, but between 1998 and 2006, we weren't getting a huge amount of growth in our investments. Yes. It's not like what we've had over the last 15 years. I had about $160,000, and it took pretty much every penny I had saved for retirement to buy 7 years of credit. And when I did it, I remember, getting the check and sending it to the state of Texas and thinking, oh my God, that hurts. I'm basically starting over. So that moment, it hurt. Every single day since I did that, I've known that I'm going to get substantially more money every year, starting at the age of 63, lasting for the rest of my life. And that's actually given me a peace of mind. I continue to save in my retirement accounts. I'm doing fine. But knowing that I have that base of income on top of Social Security has given me a certain peace of mind where if the market goes down, I don't even notice. I get rid of the stock app on my phone. Those are the kind of things that just create unnecessary stress for me. I know that if I automatically save, I'm going to be fine. And then having that base of income gives me a peace of mind that I know no matter what happens, I'm going to be getting that paycheck. So I've done it myself. And I can tell you from experience, it hurts at the beginning. But after you get through that painful, where you had a bunch of money and now it's gone, after you get through that painful experience, then after that, it's a lot easier. And it can actually help you withstand the ups and downs in the market that you're going to experience during this period as we approach retirement and in the near term after your retirement. People tend to get very sensitive to losing money, but knowing that you have that paycheck can make it a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful testimony because I can envision you writing that check now. And like you said, almost all of your retirement savings up to that point, that's a scary thing to do. And as advisors, we talk to clients about different types of annuities. Kevin's done more research than I have, but there's resistance there, either emotional or lots of dynamics going on there. But Kevin, what are your thoughts in that area? You know, you've got some specific questions
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So it's really interesting and fascinating to me that everybody says there's no pensions anymore and how horrible and we need to have pensions. And then when we suggest to somebody that they might want to buy themselves a pension, it's actually called an annuity, Michael. It's not called a pension. But then people start getting crazy and who's trying to rip me off? Someone's trying to sell me an annuity. We're fee only. And, there are a couple of pension disasters that happened in the airlines. Charlie, I think it was back in the 90s, maybe, but a couple of pensions did go bankrupt. But most of our clients are not affected by that. But why do you think there's so much concern about people actually getting an annuity or buying a pension? What's going on with that?
Well, I think if you Google annuities, then, at the very top of the page, you'll get some message from some financial advisor named Ken who says, here's why I hate annuities and you should too. There's a lot of negative messaging about annuities from people, frankly, who have a self-interest to not promote the use of annuities because they get compensated only from investable assets. So let's, if we can be perfectly frank here about how a lot of advisors are compensated, they get compensated for managing your investments. And an insurance company offers an annuity, which is essentially like a private sector pension. And, sometimes it takes assets off of their balance and it actually reduces their income if they make that recommendation. And let's also talk about the way economists like myself think about annuities. And that is that it's a puzzle that more people don't buy them. And the reason it's a puzzle is that you can simply spend more money in retirement if you take a chunk of money and use it to buy an annuity. Why is that? Because you're taking a risk off the table. You're taking what's known as idiosyncratic longevity risk, which is this, economist term that's not going to convince anybody to buy an annuity, but it's this idea that none of us knows how long we're going to live. And the example that I very often give is, imagine that your kid is having a birthday party and your spouse phones you up and says, hey, there's going to be somewhere between 5 and 40 kids that are going to show up to the birthday party. You have a birthday cake in the fridge. You need to cut each kid a slice of the cake as they walk through the door, but make sure you don't run out. So you take the cake out of the fridge. The first kid comes through the door. How big of a slice of a cake do you cut? And if I don't want to have crying kids at a birthday party, so I maybe cut it into 30 pieces. Maybe if I'm very risk averse, I'll cut it into 35 pieces. So each kid gets a very small piece of cake, but I at least am reasonably sure that I'm not going to run out. But what happens when the 30th kid walks through the door and I've only got 5 slices left? I start sweating. I get nervous. So what's happened here is I've accepted the idiosyncratic risk of not knowing how many kids are going to show up to the birthday party. But what if instead there was a bakery? And the bakery did 1,000 of these birthday parties every year. They knew on average how many kids were going to show up, and they would make me a deal. And they say, you pay a little bit extra for your birthday cake, but if more than 20 kids show up, we will arrive with a second birthday cake. So what does that allow you to do? It allows you to cut the first birthday cake into 20 slices. If the 21st kid comes through the door, the bakery arrives with a second birthday cake. I can again cut it into bigger slices, and I worry less because I know I'm never going to run out. The same thing happens in retirement. You don't know how many years you're going to live. So you have to cut your savings into smaller slices because you could live to 95, you could live to 100. And a lot of higher income, healthy people are making it to age 95 or 100. So you really have to make that your planning horizon. But what if instead you could go to an insurance company and say, all right, you can make me a deal where you on average, let's say I'm going to live to age 88. So you allow me to spend as if I'm going to die at the age of 88. And if I live longer, then you guarantee that the income will continue to come every month in my paycheck. If I live to 95, I will get income every year until I hit the age of 95. Now, an insurance company can do that because they know that on average, someone's going to live to 88, and half the people are not going to live to 88, and half of them are going to live longer. They can price it fairly. And what you can do is, instead of spreading the money out to 95 or 100, you can essentially spend as if you're going to live to the age of 88, and then spend more and worry less about potentially running out. So that's the annuity puzzle, is why doesn't everybody do that when they retire? You can read a wonderful article that was published in the New York Times by Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. It's a very clear, easy-to-read article, but by the end of it, you'll think, oh yeah, everybody should have an annuity. Most economists think this way. All economists think this way. It's one of the few things that economists can actually agree on, is that it's a puzzle that people don't buy an annuity. Now, that said, there are very many different flavors of things that are called annuities. Very often they don't even have a lifetime income component. When it comes to retirement, when you want to create income, you're looking for that lifetime income guarantee on an annuity product. It's complex. You really do need a professional, an unbiased professional, to help you pick the right one. But it's something you shouldn't be afraid of. In fact, if you ask any researcher, and I I challenge you to ask anybody who is an expert, who is an academic, who's an expert on retirement income planning, what they plan to do with their own retirement. And I've never talked to one who said, I will not buy an annuity, because it's the most efficient way to do it. And frankly, I don't want to worry about it. Like, I want to create, that's why I bought my own pension, and I plan to buy annuity income on top of that, not with all of my money, but with part of my money, so that I have that paycheck to supplement Social Security, so that no matter what happens in the market, I essentially have that stream of income. And I'm also a huge fan of what are known as qualified longevity annuity contracts, which almost nobody buys, but there is this QLAC fan club of academics and actuaries and scientists. We all plan to buy one. We all think they're the greatest idea. So essentially what they do is, you can take money from your traditional qualified assets, your 401k, your traditional IRA, and you can set up to $210,000 aside, and you can use it to buy an income that starts as late as the age of 85. And you can say, well, why would anybody do that? That's nuts. Why would you take $210,000 out of your savings and buy income that you don't even get until you hit the age of 85? And the answer is because then retirement income planning is a lot easier, because at today's rates, you can probably get close to $100,000 a year from that QLAC starting at the age of 85. And then really all you have to worry about is funding retirement spending between 65 and 85. And then you get this big income that starts later on in life. Obviously, you have to pay a lot of attention to the credit quality of the insurance company that's offering a QLAC. But there are very many, insurance companies that have been around for 150 years, and they're very conservative, and they're good partners to have when it comes to funding your retirement income. You get the tax deferral benefit of not having to pay RMDs on that $210,000 between 73 and 85, which is why there is that tax benefit. So the government's essentially encouraging you through a tax savings to buy something that you should probably buy anyway. And it's such a great idea that and it's so esoteric that hardly anybody actually buys them, except for us college professors and actuaries and engineers.
Yeah, Michael, I read all the articles when they first came out. I don't know how many years ago it was, but I thought it was exciting. And I talked to the first 5 people about it, and all 5 are like, no way. I'm not buying something for 85. Are you crazy? I might not even make it to 85. And so then I was like, and now I don't even want one. So anyway, that's a whole nother dynamic about planning for certain years. They seem less important when you're a young person, but when you do get to those years, they seem pretty important. Charlie, we wanted to talk a little bit about Roth IRAs and some of the happiness that Roth IRAs can bring to a retiree's life. Can you talk a little bit about that, Michael? And then Charlie, if you have some follow-ups on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's also an expert in retirement income planning will tell you that Roths give you a level of flexibility that you obviously don't have with a traditional IRA. You can do anything you want with a Roth IRA. You can increase the amount of spending this year. You can pass the money on to your heirs in a very tax efficient fashion. It's really all about tax rate diversification. And one of the big mistakes people often make is they don't take advantage of that period between retirement and when RMDs kick in to start converting some of their traditional IRA savings into a Roth. And those Roth conversions, you pay attention to the marginal tax brackets, which I see CPA behind your name. So I'm absolutely positive this is exactly what you do. There are these tax buckets that exist in retirement. And, one of the things that people forget is that, if you're married, you have a relatively big band of your lower tax brackets. That there are some tax brackets that extend way out, close to $500,000 that are still 24%, that are super attractive. You want to take advantage of converting those traditional into a Roth during that period when you've got the ability to do it at a relatively low marginal tax bracket. And, you have to accept also the reality that a couple is not going to be a couple forever. So you're not going to have those tax opportunities that you do in that post-retirement period. You got to get on it like that, because if you don't, then you're going to lose those opportunities. All of a sudden, the RMDs are going to start kicking in. Your marginal tax bracket is going to go up, and you miss out on the flexibility of being able to do those Roth conversions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the hard part of that, Michael, we see is the people actually have to pay the tax. And the tax money has to come from somewhere, and it's a challenge. But yes, I think thinking through that and understanding conceptually that only one of you is going to be alive in the future, and they're going to be single tax brackets, and you might be in the 32, 35, or 37 brackets. So
that's the part of your Facebook research you did where I think a few of the comments there were, I wish I would have done more Roth. I wish maybe more health savings, because it seems like to me the Roth. And right now we're doing this math game where we're guessing, hey, what might future tax rates be and what's your current marginal tax rate? So there's a little bit of guesswork on predicting those. But it seems like this may be a little bit of a stretch. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but even if we got it a little bit wrong in retirement because we didn't know, there's still that peace of mind component to like, this is tax-free money, and that makes me happy. But is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah, that is a point that I make, is that on the boards consistently what you see are people saying, God, I wish I would have put more in a Roth, or I wish I would have saved more in a health savings account, because that tax flexibility, the ability to spend more and not have to pay tax on the money, is so valuable. I think, people get resentful of having to pull out big RMDs after they hit RMD age. If you got more in Roth accounts or Roth style of accounts, then that really insulates you from having to worry about the lack of tax flexibility. And it's a source of risk. It's just like stock risk is the risk that marginal tax rates are going to go up in the future. And, I don't know if you've looked at the federal budget anytime recently, but it doesn't seem very likely the tax rates are going to be able to go down. They're probably going to have to go up at some point. And if that happens, that means that you spend less. It is a source of investment risk. It's just like markets going down as marginal tax rates going up. And you can get rid of that risk by taking a bigger chunk of your savings and turning it into a Roth.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's amazing. It's kind of like as we enter retirement, we start thinking about investing in things that are tough, like annuities are sometimes hard for people to digest, because you talked about the fear of writing that check, of investing in Roth, because it gives you flexibility. Maybe a strategy like the QLAC, that's kind of hard to digest, but when we do those things, they can lead. It's possible that it might lead just to less stress in retirement. Like you said, the birthday party analogy, I can have more fun at the birthday party. I'm not worried about the cake running out, and I don't have to worry about that. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, is a couple of these really key decisions. Investing in relationships, which are hard to do for an airline person sometimes, but that's really what makes a great retirement.
Well, that's why planning is so valuable. Mm-hmm. Not just planning the money, which obviously has a big impact on how well we live, but also planning things like relationships and health, being deliberate and not just allowing things to happen to you, but actually having control.
Yeah. Michael, what are you working on now, or what would you like to work on? What are some ideas that you're thinking about and you say, I think this is true, I'd like to confirm it, or what are you actually working on?
Well, Kevin, so I did a survey last year with that David Stewart guy that I mentioned from Super Age. And, I wanted to know all about the importance of things like health and relationships and money. So I created these questions in the survey, and David was involved in creating all of those questions. But David asked me to include one question. And the question was very simple. How positive do you feel about the future? And it was one of those questions that as an economist, I thought, well, this is just a throwaway. I'm going to include it just to humor him. And then when we got the results, I thought, this can't be. This is the strongest predictor of a range of different, not just retirement savings and investing decisions, but also investments in health and investments in relationships. Like, the thing that seems to be controlling everything that leads to a successful retirement is optimism about the future. And since then, I've done a lot of research on positive psychology and the impact of optimism on a range of different behaviors. And it should have been obvious to me. And it's one of the benefits of science. Science can give you insight into aspects of life that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to. If you can actually see that there is this consistent relationship between positive mindset and outcomes, it can help you reframe the way you think about life and the importance of having an optimistic mindset, because, boy, it has such a huge impact on how well we live. And negativity has such a bad impact because it means that you always think the worst thing is going to happen. So you never take risks in life. You never say, I'm going to go take that trip, or I'm going to go on vacation, or I'm going to do something that may involve a possible negative outcome. If you're a pessimist, you just won't do it. If you're an optimist, you think it's all going to work out. Sometimes it doesn't, but in general, having an optimistic mindset leads to better outcomes. And I'm telling you, this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see among retirees, is that they can let this pessimistic mindset set in. And it's also a function of the sort of internet era that we live in, that we are far more likely to respond to negative stimuli than we are to positive stimuli. So there's an incentive for entities, companies, whoever wants to get your attention to give you negative stimuli. And then you get sucked into that sort of negativity vortex. But people who remain consistently optimistic live a lot better. So being aware of our mindsets is an incredibly important part of life in general, not just about retirement, but also just living better as a human being.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Charlie, we're coming up on time. Any concluding comments before we have the naming ceremony?
Naming ceremony. Michael, we forgot to tell you that since we're pilots, we've kept this somewhat childish tradition where we assign a call sign. So we've got to have that little ceremony there before we wrap up today. We've got a call sign for you. But I love the positivity mindset, because it takes a lot of effort. Like you said, like we talked about earlier, in retirement, it would be easy to sink into this rut of, hey, I just watched, it's easy to turn the TV on. I get drawn into that. But man, it takes real effort to focus on exactly what you've talked about: relationships, health, now positive mindset. Any other little nuggets of positive mindset for people that they can think about, tangible things, steps to take other than what we've talked about?
One of the things that I feel very fortunate that I get, is that I get to interact with younger people. And one of the things you learn from interacting with younger people, and it's a great advantage of being an educator. I feel like people have something to teach others, and being able to teach other people who are younger it will make you so positive about the future. There are so many negative messages about the state of society or younger people in general, but then when you meet them, you realize that they're amazing. They're optimistic in their own way, and they're smart, and they want to do the right thing. When you're thinking about activities that you can do in retirement, working with younger people really is a gift. It can help you live better.
That's good news. Especially because I have young kids in the house still. I'm way too old to have these young kids in the house, but maybe it's a gift. I got to start reframing that. But awesome. Well, Michael, we appreciate your time today. And Kevin and I were talking before the show. We were like, your gift, one of your talents is taking your research, sometimes your complex research on these topics for retirement, to help people have better retirements, to help us help our clients prepare for them to have better, more rewarding, fulfilling retirements. And you do it in an entertaining way. So it's a special gift that you have there to be able to interpret some of this, scientific evidence-based things. And so one of the things when we heard you speak, we just kind of thought our reaction was bam. There it is. It's all, simple. And so I said, Kevin, that's a great call sign. Just Michael Bam Finke. And so maybe Dr. Bam or Bam in general.
Professor Bam. Charlie, let me pile on.
Yeah.
Like going to the AICPA in Las Vegas, you'd think that's exciting, but tax, investment talk, estate planning, tax, investment talk, estate planning, and then bam, Michael actually talks about things that make people happy.
Yes.
And it really was something that was a breath of fresh air to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've known some great fighter pilots with the call sign Bam Bam. And so we thought Bam fit you really well. And again, we're grateful for your time today.
Thank you, guys. It's been fun.
Awesome. Any parting shots for us? Anything that you might want to pass on we didn't address?
I would say best of luck to your clients.
Yeah.
This is a journey for them, and it's exciting. But be prepared.
That's awesome. I love it.
Thank you, Michael.
Hello, Pilot Podcast family. Charlie here. I just wanted to share with you something we've just recently developed. In the show notes, you're going to see the Pilot Wealth Index. We want you to check it out. Give it a shot. It's a quiz, a short questionnaire that allows you to understand, are you on track? We have a lot of people that say, hey, we just want to know if we're on track. Are we where we should be at this stage of our flying career, airline career, whatever it might be? How am I doing? Am I close to my peer group? Am I behind? Am I ahead? We've developed some questions, some metrics that we think if you go through this and check it out, answer the questions, you will have a very good idea of where you stand. We developed the questions that give an indication of, are you doing the right things you need to do to be prepared for an eventual retirement, and that one that can be profitable for you. So check it out in the show notes, the Leading Edge Pilot Wealth Index. We hope you give it a shot. If you have any questions at all, reach out. Happy to help. Charlie at leadingedgeplanning.com. Again, that's Charlie at leadingedgeplanning.com. You can call or text me on my cell, 865-328-4969. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Pilot Money Guys podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen. We are grateful for your reviews because they encourage others to listen in. Visit leadingedgeplanning.com to learn more and subscribe to our newsletter. Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC, LEFP, is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where LEFP and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.leadingedgeplanning.com. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.